The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. A man named John was sent from God. He came for testimony, to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to testify to the light. And this is the testimony of John. When the Jews from Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to him to ask him, "Who are you?" he admitted and did not deny it, but admitted, "I am not the Christ." So they asked him, "What are you then? Are you Elijah?" And he said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" He answered, "No." So they said to him, "Who are you, so we can give an answer to those who sent us? What do you have to say for yourself?" He said, "I am the voice of one crying out in the desert, 'Make straight the way of the Lord,' as Isaiah the prophet said." Some Pharisees were also sent. They asked him, "Why then do you baptize if you are not the Christ, or Elijah, or the prophet?" John answered them, "I baptize with water, but there is one among you whom you do not recognize, the one who is coming after me, whose sandal strap I am not worthy to untie." This happened in Bethany across the Jordan where John was baptizing. The Gospel of the Lord.
I was listening to that gospel, and he said, "I baptize you with water, but there's one coming after me." And I was just waiting for the punchline in it. They stopped the reading there and they cut it. You remember the rest of it is, "He'll baptize you with the Holy Spirit." And it's like, they didn't say it. And I thought, wow, that would have gone with the first reading that Paula read. It started out, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." And so the idea of who are we and that's the question really they put to John the Baptist, who are you? And the gospel doesn't want us to answer that question. It wants us to answer the question for ourselves. Who are you? Who are you? And that's the question that we're all supposed to wrestle with in our heart today, really. Who is it that we are in the world? And we can take a lot of different ways to approach it. It's kind of cool. We're going to give two young men here First Communion. For the first time, they're going to take communion. And they're power students. They're doing it wrong. No, they're not. They're doing it right. You know? Maybe we're the church of doing it wrong. I didn't come into the church till I was 40. You're way ahead of me. You know? And they made me a priest. But I goofed up. I was married and I got kids. You're doing it wrong. No, you're not. There's not a way of doing it wrong. It's, who are you? And you might want to say, well, I'm me. I'm me. And so this candle doesn't work. You know, even holy things, we do those wrong. But no, maybe there's a reason it's not lit. Maybe it matches this, or maybe we're honoring the Most Holy Trinity. Or maybe it's just to say, no, you're not doing it wrong. You're just doing it. And we're doing it with God. And God's coming along and helping us. And we're all doing it our way. There's a sign in the convent over here. I was going to the cookie walk earlier, and just before I walked in that door, there's a sign just painted on the wall. And it says, "In a world where you can be anybody, be yourself." Isn't that a good message? Just be you. And that's what God really wants. And in some ways, God's never more glorified than by that person who just fully lives you. No one else can do that. Only you can do it. And so God sends the Holy Spirit so you can do it in the way God intended, in the way God created you to do it. Isn't that right? And so the question is, who are you? Let's try to answer that question today. There's a Swedish guy. I love Swedish stories. I'm a Swede, right? And he's big, and he's blonde, and blue eyes. And he's on this airplane. And he's flying, and this little petite Jewish woman sitting next to him, and she looks at him, And finally she just says, "You're Jewish, aren't you?" And he kind of looks at her and chuckles a little bit. And he says, no, I'm not Jewish. And so the flight's going on, and she's looking at him, and she says it again. She goes, "You're Jewish, aren't you?" And he goes, "No, really, I'm not Jewish." And so the flight continues. They're well into the flight. She's still looking at him, and she's like, "Come on, you can tell me. You're Jewish, aren't you?" And he just wants the conversation to end. And so he says, "Okay, you're right. I'm Jewish." And she looks at him and says, "You don't look it." Yeah. John the Baptist is in our gospel again today. He looks the part, doesn't he? He just really does. And he's really good at it. But it's not about John the Baptist, remember. This gospel is about you. It's about me. And the question is, do you look the part? Do you look that part that you're called to fulfill when you took a name Christian in your baptism and you began to live that out? Are you living it out in such a way with honor, with integrity, like John the Baptist? Are you bringing honor to that name? And so I thought I'd tell you this story. It's a story about a man named Angelo Roncalli. Does anyone know who that man is, Angelo Roncalli? Yeah, it's in history now. Yeah, you'd have to teach religion to know that one, wouldn't you? Or maybe have lived through Vatican II. Actually, Angelo Roncalli is Pope John the 23rd. And he's the one who was elected to be Pope, and he brought about Vatican II. In fact, it was his idea to have the whole thing. And so here's this guy who's just humble and roly-poly and getting old. And how is it that he began to be Pope? How did they elect him Pope? Well, it was an accident. They really didn't want someone to be Pope. Pius XII had been a Pope for a long, long time. He had ruled a long time. And they thought, let's just get a caretaker Pope. Let's just get somebody who will be Pope for a couple of years and die. And we don't want any big influences in there. And they elected Angelo Roncalli. And here's kind of his story. When the voting started to go his way, when it looked like they were going to elect him, he began to write down some notes for an acceptance speech. And he began to think about what name he would take. And remember, he took the name John the 23rd. But you need to know something about that name John. When he announced that name John, all the cardinals kind of looked at each other in embarrassment. They're like, my gosh, doesn't this guy know? Doesn't he know that's the wrong name? Don't take that name. That's a bad name. There's been a lot of bad popes named John, and you don't want to take that name. Something bad will happen. Because John the 8th was hammered to death. John the 10th was murdered. John the 11th was the illegitimate son of Sergius III. John the 13th was just 19 years old. He wasn't even 20 years old yet when he was elected Pope. And John the 19th, he was just a layperson. He just wanted the power. They elected a layperson to be Pope. So they had to make him all the deacon, priest, bishops, and all that thing, and then make him Pope. And so it's not that these men found themselves in a bad situation or some unfortunate situation. These were just bad men. And they were elected Pope, and they had the name John. And this guy's taking the name John. And they're like, what? Not the right thing to do, but Angelo wanted to take the name John because he wanted to reclaim that name. He wanted to bring honor to that name. He wanted to restore that name for two people's sake. For the sake of John the Baptist, he wanted to renew that name. And for the sake of John the Evangelist, whose gospel we read out of today, he wanted to restore that name, John. But the question again, remember, it's not about Angelo Roncalli either. He's done. He's lived. He's up there in heaven and all that, we believe. He's now Saint John the 23rd, isn't he? He was made a saint with John Paul too. And so he's done his work. It's about you. It's about me. And that name that we need to reclaim, that name we need to restore and to give voice to, because we take that name Christian, don't we? And you know, sometimes that name Christian isn't a good name out there. It's not a name that people want to listen to. And so we lose our voice. And John the Baptist says, I am the voice. I'm the voice of one calling out in the wilderness. And unless we can reclaim that name, unless we can live our lives in a way that people look and say, wow, they're really living as a good Christian, then we don't have that voice anymore. And we are the voice of one calling out. We are the one whom the Spirit of the Lord has come upon to anoint us, to preach glad tidings to the poor. Now it's about us, isn't it? And so John the 23rd became known as what? Good Pope John. Good Pope John. And he had to overcome all that experience of all the bad Pope Johns. So what does this have to do with you and me? What's this have to do with our Advent journey? Everything. I kind of let the cat out of the bag. I've been saying it all along as we go. It's not about them today. Today it's about me. It's about you. It's about the way we live. And so when someone saw John the 23rd, they would say, hey, there goes good Pope John. You know? Because Pope John wasn't a good name. There goes good Pope John. What if when the world looked at you, what if when the world looked at me as we're walking out there, someone said, hey, there goes a good Christian. There goes a good Christian. That's somebody who's got it right. Somebody who's doing it right. And so doing it right doesn't mean that candle has to be lit. And it doesn't mean I can't become Catholic and be a priest, or that you can have communion when you're in high school. Doing it right means reclaiming our name, reclaiming our heritage, reclaiming what? That voice of one calling out in the wilderness, speaking in such a way that people can hear us. And they're not listening to what you say. They're listening to what you do. Because what you do speaks so loud, we can't even hear what you say, right? And so we begin to reclaim that name today. That's our third week of Advent. First week, my soul in stillness waits. All of my hope is in you, Lord. Second week, my soul in stillness waits. All of my peace, that's in you too, Lord. This week, my soul in stillness waits. All of my joy is in you, Lord. Yeah, turns out it's all in him. Next week is love. And remember, if in your relationship with God, you don't experience him as love, if you don't experience that tenderness, you're not done yet. Get back in the journey. Get back in the game. This is our Advent journey, and it's our Advent faith. And what a wonderful faith we have.